A young woman is ripped from this world by a senseless, cowardly act, leaving a jagged hole in the heart of her family and her community. But where others may have saw a tragedy beyond repair, her mother refused to let her story end in silence. She has stitched together a legacy of schools, foundations, and monthly marches, proving that while a life can be taken, a mother's unending fight for justice is a tapestry that cannot be worn thin. Hi, welcome to Kept on Ice, a true crime podcast where we focus on cold and unsolved cases. Today, we will be taking a look at the unsolved murder of Tiphne Dar'shay Hollis, which took place in March of 2010 in Jacksonville, Florida. Tiphne Dar'shay Hollis was born on December 28, 1993, in Jacksonville, Florida, to her parents Shanda and Tiphne Hollis. Tiphne was the oldest daughter of their three children, and she was described as a devoted older sister to her younger siblings. Tiphne was also described as an incredibly sweet, loving young woman who was quiet, friendly, loved fashion, and loved children. Not only this, Tiphne was also described as someone who would never cause trouble, and more importantly, she would never be affiliated with anybody who caused trouble. Her mother has even said that, quote, "She was everything a mother would want in a child. She was a good little 16-year-old girl." So by 2010, Tiphne is 16 years old, and she was a sophomore in high school attending the local Duval County Public School, Edward H. White High School, and she was also working at her mother's daycare center, Little Frenchie's Christian Learning Center, where she was known for her loving and nurturing nature towards all the children. And it has been said that this job at Little Frenchie's showed the nurturing nature of Tiphne, as she wasn't your average high school student. She was a mentor to many young girls in her community, and she was quite charitable, regularly donating her clothes and other belongings to various shelters. In addition to her charitable and nurturing nature, Tiphne also had big dreams for herself. She had aspirations to go to college and eventually become a realtor. So all of this background information leads us to the day of the crime, which was Saturday, March 20th, 2010. Tiphne was planning to go on a shopping trip with her younger sister, two cousins, and a close friend. So that morning, Tiphne and her mother hugged each other, told each other that they loved each other, and Tiphne went out to go have a fun day with her friends. And throughout the day, the group did just that, enjoying a fun day of shopping and girl time. After finishing their shopping trip together, the driver of the car suggested that the group go and see a friend who lived in the Mixon Town community, as that friend was going to be having a cookout. However, as the group began to drive to the house, the driver realized that they didn't really know where this friend lived, and they got lost in the neighborhood while looking for the friend's house. But eventually, the driver does get in contact with the friend in question, gets directions, and the group starts heading to the correct house. After that phone call, the car, which has been described as an old police cruiser with dark tinted windows, drove to the intersection of Calvin and Belfort Street. At approximately 5:45 p.m., as the group sat at that intersection, the girls began to hear shots ring out towards their vehicle. In a panic, the driver actually throws the car in reverse and begins trying to back out of the intersection to attempt to flee towards safety. But unfortunately, the driver hits another parked car and the girls are unable to escape, and the shots just keep firing. It is unknown how many times the car was actually struck, but we do have a pretty good understanding of what happened inside the car. According to the other passengers, Tiphne's first instinct was to protect her family, and they stated that she moved from her seat to cover her little sister and her cousin and protect them from the bullets. And it is during all this chaos that, unfortunately, while trying to protect her family, Tiphne Hollis is shot in the abdomen and collapses into the lap of her sister, where reportedly the last words she cried out were, quote, "Oh God," end quote. Eventually, the shots finally stopped, and the driver of the car got out of the car and ran to a nearby house to try to get help, while another passenger inside the car called the police. Those who remained inside the car held Tiphne, begged her to breathe, but her sister reported that while Tiphne did take shallow breaths, she was otherwise silent as she laid in their arms. Eventually, the police and the ambulance arrive on scene, and they rush Tiphne to the local Jacksonville hospital. But unfortunately, she would not survive, and 16-year-old Tiphne Dar'shay Hollis would later be pronounced dead at that hospital. In the immediate aftermath of Tiffany's death, her family and friends were utterly devastated, especially her mother and father. Her mother had just spoke to her that morning, and now she was never going to see her daughter again. Quote, "It's hitting me like a nightmare, and I haven't woken up," end quote. And I couldn't imagine the pain that Tiffany's family felt, especially her parents, as children are supposed to bury their parents. Parents are never supposed to bury their children, especially their firstborn, who was so young and lovely and really planned a beautiful life for herself. And Tiffany's funeral services would be held 1 week later on March 27th, 2010 at 11 a.m. at the All Peoples International Church, and she would later be laid to rest at Riverside Memorial Park. In the early stages of her grief, her mother, Shanda, would actually walk the street intersection where Tiphne was killed on the 20th of every month. And over the next few months and years, she would be joined by family, friends, community members, and supporters in hopes of turning up new leads in Tiffany's case. But unfortunately, there would be no new leads for several years. And while the family was working and seeking justice in Tiffany's case, tragedy struck the family once again. As on April 11, 2014, more than 4 years after Tiffany's murder, her father, Tiphne Hollis, took his own life at the age of just 41 years old. It was said that Tiffany's death took a major toll on him, and that he couldn't live in a world without his sweet daughter. And he would also be laid to rest at Riverside Memorial Park near Tiffany. On March 20th, 2017, Tiffany's mother was still fighting for justice in Tiffany's case. And 7 years to the day, Shanda was joined by more than 40 people who prayed, chanted, and paid respects to a young woman who was lost far too soon. By that point, the marches and walks had become somewhat of a staple in the Jacksonville community. And the goal of those marches began to expand, as in addition to looking for justice for Tiffany, it also became about spreading awareness for crimes and talking to parents and giving them tools to protect their children, and encouraging local parents to protect their children from gun violence. And for Shanda, the fight for justice is far from over. Tiffany's case has run cold, but Shanda has no intentions of letting go of her efforts to solve her daughter's murder, no matter how long it takes. And I quote, "I will never forget. I will always miss my daughter. I just want the boys who did this to be held accountable," end quote. She has also stated that somebody out there knows exactly who killed her daughter and knows exactly what happened that day. And she hasn't lost hope that someday she too will know what happened. But unfortunately, she has not heard an update in her daughter's case in several years. Now, when it comes to the investigation in this case, the police had very little to go on, and there were no immediate arrests in this case. And despite the fact that this shooting took place in a residential neighborhood where there would theoretically be lots of witnesses, silence fell over this case pretty much immediately. However, this would not stop police from developing their working theory of the case. It has been reported that detectives actually believe that this shooting was a case of mistaken identity linked to ongoing gang violence within the Mixontown community area. Now, it is my understanding that this particular area of Jacksonville does have an issue between rival gangs. However, this is Florida and they do use the term gang very loosely down there. But either way, what we do know is that the girls were riding around in a car that has been described as a quote, old police car, end quote, with dark tinted windows. So I'm assuming this is probably one of those like older model police cars. I have an image on screen right now if you're watching the podcast on YouTube or Spotify. But you know that body that just says that this is a cop car or a retired cop car? That is the vehicle I think that they're in. Official images of the car have not been released and I do not have them. So this is my best interpretation of what the car potentially looked like. So because of this, detectives and Tiffany's family believe that her murder was a result of mistaken identity, where either somebody was looking for someone who drove a very similar car to Tiffany's friend, or they believe that the car was actually being driven by police who were circling the area. Because if you remember, Tiffany and her friends got lost. So it's my understanding that they were kind of circling the community trying to find this house with the cookout. And this may have caused somebody to pay a little bit more attention to the car they were in. However, even with this working theory of the case, detectives were no closer to getting answers in Tiffany's murder. But detectives were convinced that the people of the Mixontown community knew exactly what happened, and they're just not coming forward. And this theory was further supported as during her marches, Shanda was actually told that the shooters, quote, feel sorry for her, end quote. But they still refuse to turn themselves in, which in my opinion, you can't feel that bad if you don't want to give a mother peace. And despite the organized walks, the multiple media appearances, and generally just asking for the community to come forward, no one has come forward with information on the shooter or shooters in Tiffany's case, and the case remains unsolved to this day. Shanda wants people to remember the goodness that was in Tiffany, and her friends and family have continued to fight for her and ensure that Tiffany is never forgotten. With this in mind, the family created the Dar'shay Hollis Foundation in 2013. They also established a Christian academy where they host annual fashion shows, toy drives, and organized monthly walks, all in hopes of continuing to bring attention to Tiffany's unsolved murder and honor her memory. The goal of the foundation is to help steer children away from a life of crime, and Shanda has actually made it her mission to completely end gun violence in Jacksonville. If you're curious or would like to support the foundation or the academy, I will be sure to leave links to both of them in the description of this episode. But here's a quote from their website from Shanda on how she describes her foundation. Quote, I am Shanda Whitaker Ward, the founder of the Tiffny Dar'shay Hollis Foundation. The foundation was founded in 2013 to honor my daughter, Tiffany, an innocent victim of a drive-by shooting in Jacksonville, Florida. Tiffany's murderer or murderers have never been charged. The foundation's mission is to create programs and initiatives that aim to redirect youth in the community away from a career in crime. The foundation believes education is a tool that can stop the act of senseless violence that affects our neighborhoods. The foundation aims to redirect youth in the community away from a career in crime. I believe that we can stop youth violence before it starts. Studies have shown that education is a tool that can stop the act of senseless violence. TDH has launched numerous services focusing on combating youth violence in our community in the past 10 years, including the Justice for Tiffany Initiative, TDH Christian Academy, TDH After School Programs, and TDH Outreach Services. End quote. Overall, Tiffany's family has made great strides to ensure that Tiffany will never be forgotten and that her memory will leave a lasting impact on the city of Jacksonville. And to me, that's the most beautiful part of this tragic case is taking the tragedy, taking something that could break anybody and using it to create something beautiful, something meaningful, and something bigger than yourself. Tiphne Dar'shay Hollis is remembered as an angel who got her wings far too soon. She was described as incredibly loving, sweet, nurturing, charitable, quiet, friendly, and most of all, loved her family deeply. And she is survived by that family, a family that will not allow her to be forgotten, a family that will not rest until there is justice in her case. If you have any information on Tiffany's unsolved murder, no matter how small you think it is, please be sure to call the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office at 904-630-2172. Or you can remain anonymous by calling Crime Stoppers at 866-845-TIPS. I would love to hear your thoughts on this case in the comments. However, I ask that you always be respectful in your discussion. As someone who listens to a lot of true crime, I think at times people can forget that these are real people with real pain and these are real stories. And we on this channel and in this community will always respect the victim and the victim's family first. And they will be given the utmost respect at all times, or you won't be part of this community. And that concludes our story today. I hope you have an amazing rest of your day. Please be sure to leave a like on this episode and be sure to comment down below anything you would like to comment down below. And be sure to subscribe or follow this podcast on your way out. I would really appreciate it. Thank you again so much for listening. Never underestimate the power of your voice, and I'll see you all in the next episode. Bye.